Mary Burns from Harrison's Hope, and I am delighted to kick the new year off with our January special guest, Nate Sheets. Nate, for those of you who may not have had the pleasure of meeting him yet, is an amazing behavior consultant and parent coach, supporting children and adults living with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And Nate, if I recall, you've been doing this you must be close to 20 years.
Yeah.
I also know you've worked very extensively with not just families, but foster providers, schools, and other programs to implement your recommended strategies, those brain-based strategies that help people living with this particular disability to be successful and thrive.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to find Nate in a workshop setting, a webinar that he did a few years ago, just shortly after he published his book. And that's the Essential FASD Supports that was published in 2023. I always give out copies of it at our events as a prize, and it is one of the ones that is quickly snatched up off the table. So please, everyone, join me in welcoming Nate this evening. And as we go through his session, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box. Nate has promised us he will get to answering those at the end of his presentation. And if we don't get through all of them, he's promised us kindly to give a little extra time and answer those later after the call. And I will email out his responses to the group of attendees this evening. Okay. And again, just a friendly reminder, if you can turn your cameras off because we are recording this evening. And with no further ado, I will introduce Nate Sheets. Take it over, my friend.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Today, we're going to be talking about supporting adults with FASD. This is one of my newer trainings, so you'll be kind of seeing me figure it out with you. I haven't practiced it very much. But what I'm trying to do with this workshop, or just this presentation, is let you know how I think about a situation where somebody is turning 18 or becoming an adult. Maybe they're a young adult, maybe they're not. I'm encountering all kinds of situations. And so a really common question when I'm working with youth, that parents and other people want to know about is like, what do we need to know as we go into adulthood? So hopefully this training, regardless of whether or not you're already working with an adult or it's going to be happening in a few years, hopefully it will give you some things to keep in mind and things to remember. Just a few
Yes.
things about myself. I'm a behavior consultant. I work in the state of Oregon as a licensed behavior professional with families who have developmental disability services in our state. I also work with other private clients all over, and I specialize in fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. My introduction to this world, for lack of a better term, was being a foster brother. When my parents started doing foster care, I have two younger adopted siblings, and I was around lots of foster kids. So it wasn't fetal alcohol specifically, but of course there was some, I saw some things that I continue to see today in my work with families. I've been doing this work for about 16 years. In an official professional capacity, I'm an independent behavior consultant. So I'm just like a one person operation. And as Mary said, I wrote a book called Essential FASD Supports. So all of that being said, my education is not in psychology, not in fetal alcohol. I'm a business administration major. So, there's a story to that. But all that being said, I like to be really upfront with what my academic training is, which is I don't have academic training in this. So everything I say is up for scrutiny, and feel free to, let me know if something I say doesn't quite ring true to you. That being said, I do like to be correct when I say things. So I usually am able to back up what I'm talking about. And really, a lot of what we're talking about today is just kind of patterns I've seen over the years. There's not necessarily a lot of research that I'm aware of on some of these specific topics, but it may be out there as well. So, what is my approach then? Based on my understanding of certain concepts, I'm really personally interested in cognitive skills and just like viewing a task. I'm mostly interested in normal everyday tasks. So, loading a dishwasher, having a conversation, um, anything, playing a game, all of those demand certain skills from us. And so I am mostly thinking about what are the processes that we're demanding of somebody who has a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and kind of looking at excuse me, the adult expectations or the supporter expectations that we have on them, whether or not that's appropriate for what we know about how their thoughts and their thinking abilities might work. I'm also interested in safety, which is related to trauma. Polyvagal theory is a part of it, but you'll hear me allude to that a few times throughout the training. I'm particularly interested in executive functioning, which is just deeper down into the mechanics of thought. So every situation, from my perspective, involves an attention span, an ability to resist or redirect your distractions, and impulse control. Every given moment, our brains are kind of needing to do these things, and that builds up to our experiences, and again, whether or not we are meeting the expectations that are on us in that moment. I'm also really interested in the concepts of neurodiversity. I'm not going to explain what that is, but there's a whole academic realm of that. So I like to be as aware as I can be about some of the current thinking on that. Now, as we are going in today's training, kind of one of the risks that we have is that we can frame everything negatively. And because I'm brought in as a behavior consultant or an FASD consultant, when situations usually aren't very good, like a lot of what I do naturally is addressing some kind of struggle and explaining the struggle. So before we get into struggles, we do want to acknowledge that there's a lot of people with FASDs out there. And so what that means is you're going to have a lot of strengths. I have many clients who have better grades than I had when I was in high school or college, who have more advanced degrees than I have. I have some clients who have more advanced degrees than me. So there is a wide range of strengths. And so on this slideshow, we have just some examples of that. We know that people with FASDs are often good expressors and speakers. They can be very successful in a wide variety of occupations and jobs. They can be artistically or musically talented. They have, again, cognitive and academic strengths that are measurable and very apparent. They're often very social and friendly. And all of these strengths lead to what we call invisible disability. So that's one of the reasons why there might be a lot of struggle, which we're going to continue to discuss here. One thing I forgot to get to was regarding slides. I have a lot of slides that I'm going to be going through tonight. Mary will be emailing everybody the slides after this, so you will have it. There will be some times where I'm just going to skip slides. I already know which ones I'm probably going to skip just based on time, but I'm including them in the slides because for those of you who are interested, if you want to read what I'm skipping but leaving in there for you, you're welcome to do that later. So for those of you who are here live, just sit back, relax, enjoy the slideshow on the screen, and you'll get the slides afterwards. To inform myself and just to make sure I am taking in the voices and the opinions and the thoughts of people with FASDs, I did consult 3 different people for this presentation. I talked to Miranda Bazell, Madeline Ray, and Jody Culp. So Miranda has a group that meets to support adults with FASDs. Madeline runs a company that's undergoing a lot of change, but it's meant to help neurodivergent adults kind of understand certain processes in life and work on certain things. And Jody Culp, of course, is an author who's written many books. Her late daughter, Liz, helped her write some of those books. And so as we go through this, there's different colors. If you see something in red, that means Miranda provided the information. If it's in blue, that was a thought from Madeline. And if it's purple, then that was a Jody. And I'll talk about that as we go through. So tonight's training is just us it's really you understanding like my ideas when it comes to how do we work with an adult with an FASD. And to me, what we're usually looking at is finding the best blend of them receiving support from us, of them being interdependent, so us helping them with certain tasks or situations, and then independence of them doing something alone. And how do we find that blend, adjust to it when things need to change, and set the person up for success? Success, from my point of view, is not independence. I don't care if a disabled person is fully independent. I don't think they should be, or should we expect them to. To me, what is success in this situation is finding the blend. What can they be independent with? What can they be interdependent with? And what do we just need to do for them right now until they develop a little bit of skill in that area? So we also want to consider, what do we do then when we're trying to find these blends of support and it seems like the person doesn't want any support? What do we do? We're going to talk about that. We'll also provide various support ideas for building skills and addressing the challenges that might come up that are related to adulthood. So before we get into that, I'm just going to kind of list you how I'm viewing the situations, what I call assumptions. I'm not in charge. I don't necessarily get to choose what is and isn't true, but this is just what I consider true as of right now based on my practice and what I know about disability. The first is that it's okay that adults with FASDs need support. It's not a character flaw, even if they have lots of strengths, right? They're still going to need support and probably adjusted expectations in other ways, and that's totally fine. We're going to assume that whatever a person's support needs are when they're 17 and a half, assuming that where you live, 18 is the age you become an adult, whatever it is, that once that bell tolls on that adult age, the support needs aren't actually going to be changing very much. Maybe a little, but not a lot practically in most situations. It's also okay for adults who have FASDs to want new adult freedoms, right? So if you've worked with, a teenager, or you have a teenager, and you talk about turning 18, you might think like, man, they think that turning 18 is going to change their life. And they're going to be having to experience that. Probably not a lot is going to change, and that's fine. So they're going to want to have new freedoms. They're going to want to explore them. And what more freedom might mean from their perspective is reduced support from us, not having us all up in their stuff all the time, from their perspective. So we will have to likely navigate that with them. We're going to assume that adults with FASDs will still need adjusted expectations in multiple areas, including everyday demands and tasks, in school, if they're still attending school after becoming an adult, and in lots of their social interactions. We're going to assume that if society is already misunderstanding a lot of who this person is, or what they are doing, or why they do what they do, that's going to continue, unfortunately. So knowing that, we want to have some supports in place, but that misunderstanding does increase people's risks as they become an adult. We're going to assume that if whatever a person's baseline of emotional regulation is, unless something big changes when they turn 18, it's probably going to be the same. So if they're already kind of a more escalated person, if they have a very sensitive nervous system, if they're getting angry multiple times a day, when they turn 18, that's going to continue. If that's not their baseline, maybe their baseline is more regulated and friendly and happy and cheerful, whatever that is, that will likely also continue in the days, weeks, and months after they turn 18. Obviously, over longer periods of time, those things might change. We're going to assume that adults with FASDs have the right to make legal choices that others don't agree with. So especially if you're in that parent role, you might have influence. You might even feel like you have authority because maybe they're still living in your house, getting supported by you pretty much. But they do have the right to start making their own choices. And so you have to be really careful before you come in as a parent and shut that down, because that can lead to some additional risks. We in Oregon, and probably a lot of other places, we talk about the dignity of risk. So even though a client of mine may not be doing what I think they should do, maybe they smoke a lot, maybe they're drinking constant soda, right? Whatever it should or shouldn't do, whether maybe they're having sex, and I'm thinking that's a big risk for them. All of those things, they still have the dignity to do that, even if it will lead to some stress for them later. We're going to assume everybody's journey is different as well. So what it looks like, I can't cover every situation in this training. And one really important thing about providing care for anybody who has a neurodevelopmental condition, including FASD, is that you're individualizing for them. And that's important and key if you actually want to find solutions that have a chance of working. So when we individualize supports for them, there are certain things that's limited by. A big one is region. Where I live in Oregon, when it comes to individualizing, we have lots of options. There's different ways that people can be housed. There's different levels of support they can receive at home. There's different activities during the day that they could potentially do. There's job opportunities. That amount of resources is not available in most places. So, of course, we're going to be limited by that. So the person's personal resources, whether they have disability service, some kind of mental health supports, that also might influence how and what we can individualize. And then laws regarding guardianship. If the person has a legal guardian, that might influence how the person's team and themselves are able to individualize things for themselves. Oh, I have a double slide. Other things that determine individualization are personal factors. So the person's strengths. Certain strengths will lead to more or different opportunities. Their own financial resources. Do they have an ability to work? Not everybody can work, right? When it comes down to it, we want to try it. We want to provide all the support, but it might come down to this person does not have the skills to go to work or to take advantage of the work opportunities that might be presented to them. What are their interests? What's their general personality? What do they want? What are their desires and dreams? The overall complexity of a situation will determine what we do and how we support. Miranda recommends, if you can, if you know of an adult with an FASD who's in your community or that that you're networked with, maybe you can talk to them a little bit, especially about what you're worried about in the future, and just get some of their practical ideas of how they might approach it. Jody mentions helping out other adults with FASDs. We know that there are other adults with FASDs in our circles. Maybe you can help out in a situation where you're more subjective, right? So especially if your relationship with your adult child is one of the issues that we're slowly unpeeling here, you might want to help other adults where you can be more subjective, and that will teach you some support tactics. There's a lot of changes that come with adulthood, both like in our brain psychologically, as well as what a person is experiencing, and that can be stressful for a lot of adults with FASDs. The changes are especially intense if these circumstances also align with turning 18 or closely afterwards. Changing housing, changing primary caregivers, right? Maybe they're going to live in a residential program. Maybe they're just living with somebody else. Maybe they're living on their own. There's lots of things that could be going on. Or if school will be ending soon, has ended recently, or will be changing in some way. Some school districts in the United States have school programs that go up to 25. And so those might be appropriate for some people and maybe not for others. Mira, you might want to make sure that everybody's muted. I'm hearing a little sound.
Okay.
This is also, adulthood is the time where the life experiences are going to really start to happen more often. And so what that means is, usually with youth, we are trying to proactively keep regulation going, build skills, and prepare them, right? And that will happen to varying degrees of success and difficulty. And so I guess what I'm getting at here is, the conventional wisdom is, well, you got to let them experience it so they'll learn, right? Well, if that wasn't something that really worked for this person's brain before they were 18, we're not going to expect it to work soon after they're 18. Now, as they get older, that might change, right? As adults get older and they continue to develop into their adult lives, things will happen, things will be learned, right? And I just I take the perspective that we're not going to be able to stop everything, but we still want to support as much as we can, rather than hoping that, well, if they just go through that traumatic event, that they're going to learn something from that. Maybe. Good luck. Miranda points out that for some people, some things get worse. Maybe there's new sensory issues that can occur around this time due to various reasons and changes that are going on. Maybe they start to show overwhelm when they're going into certain environments or new environments. And she points out correctly that whatever few resources you feel like kids with FASDs have, there's definitely fewer for adults. And so my hope as I work with people turning it, who are already adults, who are going to be adults, is that the primary people in their life have an understanding of what FASD is and how it impacts them, and who realize that on some level, expecting this person just to kind of get it together and try harder and to learn the lessons that we feel everybody else learns, that's not going to be healthy, and that's going to contribute to risks over time. Madeline also points out that any individuals who has an FASD, their personal understanding of FASD will change over time. And when we start talking about FASD, we learn that some people are completely closed off, they're completely embarrassed due to the stigma. Other people are interested or curious about it, and some other people like really dive in and they want to learn more about their brain. So we want to meet people where they're at. Yes, things can get worse, but there are positive changes that happen when people turn 18. Um, if life at home is very stressful and we're making it work until we turn 17 or 18, and then the person goes to live somewhere else, there is opportunity there for the relationships that were previously strained when we were together 24/7. Now that those are a little bit more spaced and you have breathing room and your own time to recover and maybe even to heal, depending on what's going on, the relationships can improve because they're being supported maybe by some other people, at least primarily. They might feel more freedom in their life and in their choices just by turning 18. Even if nothing really changes from our perspective, maybe to them, like that, it just feels really good to know that they have the ability to make those choices. Maybe they're going to be done with school. That's a great accomplishment, right? So what we want to look at as we think about what support does somebody need is what is the level and the spectrums here of independence or interdependence. And like I said, we want to find a balance in supporting that. So one question we want to ask ourselves as we're considering this is, who wants independence? If people are using the word independence, my first question is, who really wants this? Is this something that the adult with FASD is expressing for themselves, which it often is? Or is this something that kind of their caregivers or the society around them, right? The expectations around them is saying, you need to be more independent. If there's pressures to increase independence, but there's not the support to actually sustain it, that will be stressful and maybe even traumatic. And it's going to create a lot of people who get disappointed in this person for not kind of getting it together. But that's not how this really works, right? And so we'll have a decrease in support because people think this person should be more independent. And then we actually see an increase in struggle. So increasing independence, whatever we want it to mean in this person's life, it has to be more than they're going to try harder and be more independent. There has to be some supports with that. Sometimes we as the supporters are thinking, man, can they please just try harder? It could be that. Sometimes it's the person themselves. And I'm going to mention this a few times. When I'm talking to many clients, I've been trying to problem solve. Sometimes their solutions to the issues is, I just won't do that anymore. Right? Or I'll try harder and this won't happen. And that is often them not setting themselves up for success because they're expressing what many people have been telling them year after year after year, which is, this is about you trying harder. So we want to think about, and those of us who are here live, how have you seen try harder expectations play out? Whether it's an expectation that you've had of them, where you gave them an expectation, but it kind of boiled down to, you got to try harder to meet my expectation. Maybe it was their school that gave that to them, maybe another situation. But almost certainly, if you're supporting somebody with an FASD, they've had those expectations from people. You can have expectations, by the way, and the person can try harder, but you can do those things with increased support. So it's not that trying harder is not a part of this, but you have to understand how it plays a part in the person's overall situation. Motivation is not something they can just turn on and off. And I'm sure most of us here in the training already know that because it's a brain thing. So to balance support, interdependence, and independence. So interdependence is they're doing stuff with somebody to a certain extent. You provide a verbal prompt for them to brush their teeth, they brush their teeth. That is interdependence. You hand them the toothbrush, they brush their teeth. That is interdependence. Independence is nobody's prompting, it's all on them, they got it, they're going, right? So it will depend on the situation. We want to consider, what is this person's strengths and abilities? Hint, if it's not memory, expecting them to remember things probably is an unreasonable expectation. If it's not holding their emotions in a regulated fashion or quickly cooling themselves down, expecting them to go into situations where they're getting heightened and just somehow figuring it out probably is not going to be a reasonable expectation. What's their actual age and their legal rights? What's their desire to be supported? What's their ability to be supported? And what are the risks of whatever we are moving forward with? So we're going to break a bunch of these down. When it comes to strengths and abilities, we want to consider somebody's cognitive strengths. Many people with FASDs have cognitive strengths. Sometimes it's inconsistent. You know, they can zero in the attention span for 2 hours one day, and then 2 days later, they can't focus on anything. Those kinds of inconsistencies, those are to be expected rather than to be a source of stress. You can't be stressed out about inconsistency with any developmental disability. Jody points out that your adult child with an FASD is often more capable than you imagine, so let them surprise you. Look for glimmers as well as hiccups, definitely. She also points out that your adult child with an FASD is different than you, and that's okay, right? And so hopefully you figured that out a long time ago. But if not, that's something to be thinking about now. Jody mentioned that her daughter Liz loved wigs and makeup. That was a big part of what Liz was into. And Jody herself likes digging in the dirt and climbing trees, right? And so that is an example of two very different people still having a wonderful relationship and providing support. We also want to remember, and Jody points this out, and it is true, there are strengths in people who might think more concretely. Not all people with FASDs are concrete thinkers, but a lot of them are. And it can be very easy to say, well, they're rigid thinkers. Well, maybe, yes, but also what are the strengths within the concrete thinking? There definitely are some. We've kind of pointed out already that strengths are a double-edged sword. So if you have strengths and you have a developmental disability like FASD, you have been expected to mask your whole life, right? And masking being you are dysregulated, as an example. Something is overstimulating you or troubling you emotionally, but you keep a straight face and you hold it together. You're in an environment with noises, and instead of having a reaction, you hold it together and pretend nothing is wrong. There's many different examples of masking, but masking takes our energy and sometimes deprives us of being in the moment. So you can have some kids who have great strengths at school, but then the grades aren't so very high. And one reason might be, this is just one of many, that they're going to school, they're dysregulated, they're putting all their effort into masking and maintaining the appropriate behavior and being, getting the teacher's approval, but then the learning isn't happening and the processing isn't happening. And there are risks to that situation where you're constantly masking rather than actually truly engaging and being regulated. Miranda points out that a lot of adults with FASDs often will not ask for the supports they need, such as slowing down in a conversation. They're not going to say, hey, can you slow down for me? They may not even realize it. So that could be one thing, or even if they do, they may not say it. Asking for a more simplified explanation, if we're using too many words or they're just not in a place to process it, they may not say, hey, can you simplify this for me? So of course, a big part of finding supports is having supporters who can be thinking about these things and offering them as we determine that they are needed. Adults with strengths may still have unreasonable expectations of themselves. And I gave you an example of that already. They think that the answer to a problem is that they're just going to try harder and make it work or make it stop. So we want to be aware of that. Madeline brings up that supporters need to be interested in what the person wants. And that's hard, especially if we've been parenting them for many years and we kind of have been running the show, or we think that, we have the most knowledge about this person, which might be true. It can be easy for us to still be very dictating of what is and isn't going to happen. You can mama bear it, for lack of a better term. I'm usually working with moms, so that's the term there. That doesn't mean that will all completely stop. That doesn't mean that this person doesn't need you to assertively tell them their limits, as long as it doesn't create stress between the two of you or escalation. But we also just want to be careful that we're not kind of steamrolling them, which is very common when somebody has a developmental disability throughout history. Disabled people have not been able to make choices for themselves. Madeline says, so often they don't seem to care, the people supporting the adults, and they have their own agenda about what they want to teach or talk about. If the person senses that agenda, it feels like the supporter does not care. It feels like they are a problem to be solved. So that can definitely happen. So we want to be interested in what they are interested in and research. If they're interested in some game that you know nothing about, maybe you don't play video games, research it. Figure out what kind of game it is. What is it about this game that might work for that person's brain or just their personality, maybe, and try to see where the commonalities or what you can get into lie within there. So next we want to talk about the desire to be supported. So we're going to start with the person's desire to be supported by us or lack thereof, and then their ability to be supported. There are several risks that I've encountered over the years of somebody who is essentially being forced to be supported when they don't want it. And there's various levels. Sometimes they're just everyday kind of minor things, and then sometimes they go into bigger issues and can be a real barrier to working as a team and collaborating. Being supported by people, having people kind of come into your space trying to support you, even if they're being nice and you don't want it, either in that moment or in general, that will likely trigger dysregulation and escalation and potentially even crisis, depending on the things you're trying to support. They're going to feel unheard by us if we're kind of forcing support, or they're not necessarily going to, but they could. It's a risk. It can strain relationships. Having somebody who, from your perspective, is harassing you constantly and constantly talking to you and constantly telling you what to do, that's straining on the relationships. And it can lead to people feeling hopeless about the future. If the people closest to them can't give them what they want, that can create feelings of hopelessness about what about life for me? If I can't get it now, what is out there for me? So those are things we want to be aware of. There's also a risk of not being supported when you need it. So you can have somebody who doesn't want the support. We honor that, but that will also come with risks. It can create ongoing stress because now the person is refusing our supports and they're struggling with that. There could of course be obvious safety issues when somebody is no longer being supported in certain ways. And oftentimes what it ends up is be a try harder situation where they're trying harder over and over again, but we're not seeing the success from that. So what we want to ask ourselves as we are supporting them, what are the supports that they are resisting? So usually to say Johnny doesn't want to be supported at all actually isn't true. There's specific things that's pissing Johnny off day in and day out as we're trying to support him with it. So we don't want to just say it's support he doesn't want. It's to actually dig deeper with what are the supports that are causing the issues. And asking Johnny that, asking and expecting an answer right away may not work, right? Because he may not fully understand what it is about this that he doesn't like. So these are just some examples. Daily interaction, when we're offering time to think. Is that creating an issue? Hopefully not, because it's really important that we give them time to think. Adjusted expectations, help with hygiene and daily tasks, which are in some ways the most important day-to-day supports. Emotional regulation, getting upset and having us respond in a certain way. Maybe there's some stressors within some of those. There's other supports. So survival, a place to live. You might have an adult who doesn't want you, helping them through their hygiene every day, but they absolutely would like your support with finding a place to live, right? So it's not all support. Maybe they'll be very happy if you help them get food stamps or food somehow. Take them out to eat, whatever it is. Supervision, right? That sometimes is a support that people with FASDs need even into adulthood, and that can be a big source of stress. So we have to work it out with them. There's some other examples here on the slide that I won't go into, but there's just a wide range of things that somebody might need a support. So again, asking what supports are they resisting, and that starts the problem solving process. Identify their understanding of why they don't want to support. And again, what they give you right away may not be the full story, but we can start there, which is what we want to do with collaboration. When possible, we want to avoid forcing support. That will be situation by situation. And asking, where are they willing to be supported? So if they are willing to have us cook meals for them, if they are willing to have us problem solve social situations with them, that's where you're just going to start, and make sure that you develop a good connection as you do that, and a good process for collaboration, which I talk more about in my book. Um, so let's say that they are not really wanting, I definitely have clients that I come to meet with, they do not want to talk to me really about anything, right? So when we're at that place where we're getting just kind of general resistance toward problem solving anything, are they willing to make a plan to reassess support needs in the future? So let's say they're refusing to take meds, then the conversation might be, okay, we're not going to force you to take meds. We don't have to keep talking about it. But do we agree, John, that if you hallucinate again, right, or if you go into crisis again and have a mental health crisis, that then we'll just have a conversation about it again and we'll check in. And just see if there's an understanding that we don't have to do this now, but what's the scenario where we might have to reintroduce this again? Maybe it can be based on time. So, okay, we don't have to talk about it now. Can I ask you about it again in 6 months? Can I ask you about it again next year? Maybe based on events and success. Okay, I'm working with an 18-year-old. We want to talk about certain things, but they're still trying to graduate high school in the next few months. Okay, let's not talk about it right now. Let's talk about it after you graduate high school. Miranda mentions, having pre-agreed upon check-in. So maybe there is like a bigger thing you're helping somebody with, and you don't know, like, okay, if I text them, is that going to make them angry, right? Or are they going to get reactive to me for bringing it up? So try to get an agreement. Every 2 weeks, I'm going to text you, just how is this going? And see if they're cool with that. So the idea is to have something pre-agreed upon to help enhance some kind of check-in, or at least an acknowledgement that I'm here to support you if you need it, even if when I bring it to you again, you still might say no. Are they in a season where they need to learn by experience rather than being told? You can say something to somebody, they can listen, they can even process it, but does it change anything? Does it build a skill? Is it going to actually influence what they choose or do not choose to do? Maybe, maybe not. Right? But if you're working with a 17-year-old and you feel like I can't say anything to them, they're not absorbing any of this. They think it's silly. They think that I'm mom or dad. Those are the situations where we start to let some experiences happen. The idea is that you are staying a safe person instead of having a reactive interaction with them constantly. So then when they go have some stress out in the world and they need to talk to somebody, we want you to be as safe as possible for them to come and chat with as the years go through. So they are an adult. We want to make sure that we're making every effort to allow them to be in control of their supports. And that might even mean risks. Maybe somebody turns 18 and they're like, I want my own phone. I don't want any filters. I don't want any monitoring. Yikes. That's a risk if all of that was being prevented when they were a youth for their own safety, right? Jody mentions how important it is if somebody's struggling to want to be supported, let's build some community around them. Help them see that this is what support might look like, right? In a way that actually works for them. Miranda asks, is there a peer advocate or a mentor who can work with them rather than just all of their previous caregivers? That might be really good for some people. And this is going to be especially important, having different mentors slash people to talk to about this kind of stuff. Is going to be really important if you already have a reactive relationship with them. If whenever you try to approach them, even if you think you're being nice about it, there's reactivity and now you're both kind of emotionally dysregulated. Maybe they're more dysregulated than you, but you're stressed out too. That's a sign of reactivity. And first 18 years of life, if you weren't able to fully develop that kind of collaborative relationship, maybe now is the time to look for other people to take the load off of your plate so you can just have as connected of a relationship as possible until the person is more willing to come to you for problem solving or support, which they may not, right? I'm not saying this all will happen. We're just trying to lay a situation that is the best as possible, even if the person is making choices that are going to traumatize themselves, right? Or that are going to create stress in their life. It will likely happen. People are making choices. Jody mentions that even peers or friends who have their own challenges can offer counsel. So a lot of parents kind of police their child's friends, and then as they become a teenager, we really don't like who this person's hanging out with. They have a bad influence. We have those thoughts about their peers. Jody's bringing up, I think, a legitimate point that even if somebody's not perfect, right? they might want to, give your child some advice. So just, be aware that that might happen and look for the value in what they're saying, especially if the adult that you're supporting really values that person's input. Even though you're like, why are you listening to this guy? Don't show that in your response. Be like, okay, well, I can understand this, and see if it opens up a conversation where you can provide some input. In terms of community, there's some online groups on Facebook. There's the Broken Wings group. And like I mentioned before, Miranda has a group for adults with FASDs who meet on Zoom. So if you're interested in accessing those, you can find her information in the slides. When the person absolutely does not want support, we want to respond in a way that will hopefully keep things open in the future. Every situation is different. I'm not saying that you have to have the personality where you're like, I'm going to let everything go. And when my adult child is ready to come back to me, I'm going to open them I'm going to have open arms toward them, and we're going to work it out. You don't even have to think that way. This can all be annoying to you. I'm just giving you the information. What I know doesn't work is stress, is disconnection, is constant arguing, is constant reactivity. That doesn't work. So when you're dealing with somebody who may already be reactive towards you or very resistant, the question is, we gotta wait for them. So how do we do that in a way to where they find when it clicks for them that they need mom or dad or whoever you are, I need to talk to them. I need to get their help. I need their support, whatever it is, that we can have that happen in the best way possible. We're going to be able to make some progress there. So we want to honor their choices and decrease struggle as much as possible. Does the person have a drive for autonomy? So part of a lot of people who have sensitive nervous systems, maybe this is because they were prenatally exposed to alcohol, maybe they've been through lots of trauma, maybe they have developmental disabilities that just create a sensitive nervous system, like autism, for example. A lot of them have what we call a strong drive for autonomy. And it's not just the person wanting to be in control of themselves, but that's what it looks like on the surface. But what's actually going on is when they are not in control of themselves from their nervous system's perspective, their nervous system has the response of threat. So you asking them to do something, if you get a big resistance to something that you think is simple, this might be one thing to start looking into, a drive for autonomy. There's lots to this. I'm not doing the topic justice and I don't have time to do it. But what I want to pull from this, if the person has a strong drive for autonomy, and even if they don't necessarily, you might want to use what we call declarative language. This is complex. I'm going to slow down and talk us through it. But if this seems like something that you're interested in, we have some resources for you. So in certain situations, when you're providing coaching, if you tell somebody what to do, that's going to turn them off. They're going to be like, no, don't do that, right? So what you want to do, especially in day-to-day supports, is think about the language you're using. This isn't about how nice you're saying it, though it's important that obviously you have a regulated tone of voice and volume. This is about the actual literal words you are using. You can read more about this in a book called The Declarative Language Handbook by Linda Murphy. This is especially important to consider if you feel like the person has a strong drive for autonomy, if they're constantly or frequently reactive to you or your directions or your requests, or if they're oppositional to your directions or your requests. So take a look at that. It's a quick read. It's something worth trying for a few months and then seeing, okay, how does this seem to work for me when I'm able to remember it? The problem is remembering it because it's not very easy. So some examples: you're focused on objects rather than the person, and in general, you're trying to avoid mentioning the person directly. So some of these come from the book as examples. The medication is on the counter. So you might say that to somebody rather than saying, hey, it's time for you to take your medications, or will you please go take your medications? Those are very direct and sometimes a little triggering to certain people's nervous systems. One way to get started with it is using I wonder statements. So instead of saying, hey, you left your coat outside, or you need to go get your coat from outside, not about how nice you're saying it, that's irrelevant. You might say something like, I wonder what's going to happen if your coat gets left outside. And then you be quiet and you let them process that. And the idea is not to give them a direct instruction, but to kind of give them something to think about. And in that moment, maybe they'll think about it. Maybe they'll instantly be distracted on something else. Maybe they'll still sense the demand, even though you're wording it this way. A lot of things can happen. But again, we want to give it a try and see if it helps. Making a statement like, oh, there's a lot of people at the store today, rather than asking directly, how do you think you're going to do if we go in there and there's all those people in there? Or you need to behave if we go in there and there's a lot of people. Obviously, those other ones are going to be triggering to a lot of people's nervous system. Making an observation. I noticed that it seems hard for you to focus today. And then just leaving it there. See what the person is able to process and think about, and maybe start a conversation or some problem solving. So you make a statement, and then you always got to give them time to think. Giving time to think is extremely important. So we've talked about the desire to be supported. Now let's talk a little bit about the ability to be supported. Having somebody help you or support you isn't a freebie cognitively. It's still demanding something of you. So we want to understand that receiving support is actually a skill that we're developing, right, with the person. So we want to explore supports that generally will reduce stress instead of increasing it, that are developmentally appropriate for where the person with an FASD is at, and that are also FASD informed, and that are individualized to the person's desires and current abilities. When a support of ours is triggering refusal, resistance, or stress, maybe escalation, then their ability to be supported will go down. So we're having to weigh not only in general, but in the moment, what is going on, what is the response, and how might I need to adjust or try again in a different way. So to support these abilities, we want to provide time to think and to regulate multiple times throughout the day. And what this will practically mean, and I talk about this more in my book, is not responding instantly when they have some kind of emotion towards you, or when you ask them to do something and they say no, or they whine, or they give you some kind of resistant response, maybe oppositional. What most of us do instantly is we got something to say. Right? We have a correction. Oh, yes, you are going to do that, or you need to do that, or we have our own emotions or our own frustration, or we say, that's not nice. That's not respectful. We have lots of instant things to say. And those are the instant things that I'm trying to encourage you not to say. So don't instantly respond to their opposition or emotions. We want to understand that visuals make thinking easier. So whenever possible, we want to be using visuals with the person. But that's one of the things where the caveat is they have to be willing. If I say, hey, can I make a list of these things that we want to get done? And they go, no, that's dumb. Then I'm not going to do it right then, because they're not bought into the visual support. So you got to wait until they are willing to do that. Same thing with things like planning ahead, collaborating, maybe role playing certain situations and practicing situations ahead of time. That's wonderful when we are working with somebody who wants to do that, but that's not going to be everyone. It feels a little silly to role play for some people, right? Especially maybe the first time you bring it up as an option. So again, whenever possible, plan ahead, role play, and practice situations or tasks or, things that could occur, but they have to be willing as well. Examples of where you might role play or practice. Let's look at job hunting. Role play or practice looking for applications online. Don't actually look for applications necessarily, but just talk about and maybe sit down with them and say, what are some of the websites that we could look at, and just pull them up. And maybe that's all you do one day, right? Maybe going in and getting an application. So if we don't want to just send the person in and say, hey, go in that store and ask for an application. We want to pretend to be the person behind the counter and help the person that we're supporting know exactly what they can say. And what happens if the person says this, or what happens if the person says this? How do you want to introduce yourself? Whatever we anticipate might occur as they're going to get some kind of application. Filling out the applications, right? Can we give them a lot of the information on a piece of paper ahead of time and go over it with them? So if they are filling out applications more on their own without us there, at least they have something visual and concrete and rehearsed and talked about to hopefully help make that process easier. Filling out applications is a nightmare, right? Other elements of role playing and practicing job hunting skills can be helpful. We can role play and practice certain issues of emotional regulation. If the person acknowledges that they have an anger problem, whatever language we might be using, right? That they can get dysregulated, they can get overwhelmed easily. Then can we practice that when they're doing well and when we're having a good connection with them and they're willing to practice one of those coping skills that we talk so much about, right? And then there's examples here of specific things. Maybe feeling the body sensations is where you're at first. And so when I say feeling your body sensation, the the question is, when you feel angry, where do you feel that in your body? So my first question is, when I ask that question to you, whoever you are listening to this, watching this, do you have an answer? Do you instantly know what body sensations anger is associated with? Have you taken the time to think about that or observe that as you are experiencing emotions? A lot of people haven't. So maybe you should do that for a while so you can kind of get an idea of what we're talking about with this and then help the person think about it at various different stages. Again, practicing coping skills, practicing what to say or do when they're dysregulated with a romantic partner, right? With a coworker, right? If the emotional regulation is going to be an issue, let's give them something and ideally have them practice with us. Various interactions with peers can be practiced or role played ahead of time. Going on dates, friends, strangers, all of those situations. Other factors that influence the ability to be supported are going to, just things to think about. I want to know who supports them successfully. Why is it that this person is particularly successful with them? Why do they buy into this person? Maybe there's information in there about what they need from us and other people. Who don't they get support from successfully? What is that person doing that we know is maybe making things unsuccessful or contributing to the reactivity? Things for us to avoid, right, as we look for other supporters. How do they engage, ultimately, is what we're asking. Where are we at with routine? Does the person right now need more or less routine to be supported? It could be that if routine feels less demanding, then buying into other supports might get easier for them. So I'm not always going to just say you always got to have routine, because routine is time and place and where a person is at developmentally. A lot of people with FASDs, in my opinion, do not get into solid routines until they are late 20s and going into 30s. And not just people with FASDs, but a lot of people with neurodevelopmental conditions. So trying to force them to be really into their routine, unless that's just natural for them and you can tell that's great and regulating for them, that just might be more stress, because now you're making them do these routines that is just a bunch of tasks really, and they're not getting the good routine feeling from that, and that leads to stress and disconnection over time. If so everybody's different. Maybe somebody who's a young adult has had a lot of routine throughout the years, from childhood to teenagehood to adulthood. Maybe there was no routine because either it didn't work or it wasn't tried, whatever the situation is. If there has not been routine, we want to ask if increasing routine in that person's life would make things easier for the person, and are they willing to do it? So in our problem solving, we might say, well, what if we, started doing like an evening routine? Why don't we write some things down and I can help you do that every night? And we can try to make it really relaxing, right? Again, that particular strategy will not work in a lot of situations, but it's something worth trying. You don't want to add routine if you get the sense that a routine right now is just going to annoy them or irritate them or overwhelm them. That's a sign that that's not the direction you want to go in right now. Miranda points out, especially if we're trying to bring up things and just, mentioning new things is just overwhelming to even think about. Say, okay, let's not make any changes now, but what's a goal when we can start this goal? When can we start this project? Whether it's finding a job. Okay, talking about a job is a little too much right now. What if we talked about it again next month and just see where you're at and see if the person is okay with that? You want to have essential supports that are specific to FASD in everyday life. So all of the things that we talked about are not going to be helpful if these things are not happening already. So plug for the book, if you want to know what I'm talking about and the correct priority, from my opinion, you can read the book, because it starts with the most important things and then we move forward. And the most important things is this person's nervous system and the sense of safety and their connection with the most important people in their life. So if you are their parent, right, and you have an adult child, if things are struggling in your relationship, then right now the focus is on how do we make improvements there. Even now, even though it seems like maybe things can't change or they're so reactive, are we doing the basics when it comes to safety? And maybe you are, and it's still a challenge. Like that can happen, but usually there's things that we can process. I don't have time to go into the specifics of these though tonight, because that's not the topic. It's mostly about providing supports for adults. I have mentioned giving time to think. In my opinion, giving time to think is the most important strategy. And it applies in so many situations. It applies when the person is doing well and we're just having a conversation that I want them to think about. And it applies when things are struggling, when emotions are going high. Whatever the situation is, there's a good chance that if we could both stop to think for a few minutes, things would probably go in a better direction. Even if for the very sake that you need to be thinking about, okay, how am I going to approach this challenging and intense situation? We want to use visuals, again, whenever possible and when the person is willing. We're just not thinking about it, right? Visuals are easy to forget because we can do things verbally. That's how we get a lot of communication and expectations communicated. But if we stopped to utilize a visual, might that be beneficial for this person? And we want to develop an ability to collaborate. Many of my clients are not there. They do not want to collaborate. It is triggering to them to have somebody sit and say, hey, can we talk about this, right? So we are waiting for them through providing these other supports to get to a place where they accept collaboration, right, and offers to collaborate and will actually benefit from it. So these are, again, are all discussed in my book. We want to think about building up task abilities. So again, we can't assume that like they're just going to be supported and be able to do everything. So one practical strategy that Jody gave me, which I've really liked, and I have implemented into all of my templates and suggestions for a lot of families, is doing something completely for them, except for like the very last thing. So one example might be laundry, right? Laundry, maybe it's a source of stress for them. Maybe they're just not interested in it. Maybe they don't care if their laundry is washed or not, or folded or not, or put away or not. And so then if it's something that we want to start working on with them, we might do everything up to folding the clothes and then only asking them, hey, can you come out here and help me take these clothes into your room and we'll put them away together. If they can handle that, right, and that's easy enough for them, then do that for a while, right, and build success, and then add something to the end of that. So maybe you do everything and you fold half the laundry, and then you invite them out and say, hey, can you help me fold this shirt? And you kind of keep doing it. You're doing the vast majority of it, but you're modeling the task for them rather than demanding, you need to sit here and fold that shirt, and like kind of waiting for them and having that be a potentially stressful activity. That the laundry is just one example. Maybe it will be a different task that you would do this for, but it's something worth thinking about. And again, the idea is that you're making it as easy as possible, building success for a while, and then slowly adding and or removing kind of support or scaffolding. So they're learning that process backwards. Jody did this with Liz when Liz was into wigs. Like obviously wigs take certain skill, right? So when you're starting out, you don't know how to style a wig, you don't know how to care for it. So Liz helped her with that by doing this process, and had Liz help with, sorry, Jody had Liz help with the very end of the process, and then they started building more and more forward. I'm skipping these slides proactively because there's just a bunch of extra information about those concepts there from some of the people I talked to. So how do we meet somebody halfway when they are reluctant to receive supports? And what are some things we want to keep in mind? The first, that it is okay and expected that some adults with FASDs will not know what the supports they need are. Saying, hey, what do you want us to do? We're all ears. They're not necessarily going to know. And their understanding of why they are struggling might be different from yours, and they might be different from mine and from my overall approach. And that's okay. And whenever I say something should be expected in multiple scenarios, what I'm getting at there is, if this thing is happening and you're feeling stressed, and especially if your stress is creating reactivity or stress in the person you're supporting, That's what I want to avoid. If it's something is to be expected, we want to let it roll off our back. So we know that inconsistency should be expected rather than something we're annoyed at because we know they can do this because they did it on a different day. That's not how FASD works. We expect the inconsistency and we roll with it. And the same thing here, we should expect that when we ask somebody what they want, they either don't know or they'll give us an answer, but then when we try to do it in the moment, they might change their mind. That's okay. That's how figuring this all out works. There's a big difference between talking about supports proactively ahead of time and then having them play out in everyday life when the person's in a different mind, state of mind or, a different situation. When things are not working out, when we're trying to collaborate, but it's really clunky or the person doesn't seem like they're really following through with what they agreed to, we want to keep trying to dig deeper to brainstorm potential solutions. The fact that a plan isn't working is probably more than, well, they just didn't want to. It can feel that way, right? We might go there initially with our thoughts, but is there a brain thing that even if we don't know what it is, right, instantly, that's probably going on? Probably. There's lots of things that could be going on. So even if you don't know why is this a struggle, don't start with, well, they could just do it if they wanted to. That puts you in that try harder kind of mindset. There are different spectrums of support. So again, in asking somebody what supports do they need, it's not all like we're doing this completely for you or you're doing it completely for yourself. There's various ways that you can navigate that. So if we think about medications, maybe we're working with an adult who will not remember who cannot remember to take their medications consistently. Well, then if the system is you hold on to your meds, you take them independently, we're never going to ask about them, that's probably an unreasonable expectation, even if that's what they want initially, right? There's lots of things between that and I'm holding your medication, I'm dispensing it to you, and I'm watching you until I see that you've swallowed that pill, right? Some people might need that if we actually want the medications to be taken, but there's many different things between that, right? You can hold the medications for them, but they come to you when they're ready. You can provide verbal prompts, of course, if they're willing to do that. So it's just about asking them what they want and also just considering, will this actually work for them, and then having an agreement. So I might collaborate with somebody and they're like, okay, yeah, you can verbally prompt me to give me my meds every day at 10 a.m. And I say, great. Now I might be thinking, I'm going to prompt them to do this and they're going to refuse in the moment, right? I don't have to voice that in the moment. I can follow through with the plan a couple of times. And if it's not successful, then the next time we collaborate, I could ask them a question like, I'm curious how you think that our plan is going with me reminding you and get what their perception of that is. Do they know that they have not been following through, or do they need us to kind of gently point that out to them and see if that opens up, okay, doing that didn't work, what's another thing I can do to help you, right? How can we do this a little bit differently? There's a bunch of different examples of how we might do this in various areas of life here. We want to give generally lots of time to think and to process in the moment as you're problem solving. So saying something like, hey, I got a question for you, or I want to work something out with you. Why don't I just tell you like what the issue is? And then we'll both take 5 minutes to think about it. And if they're willing to do that, you give them the issue very simply and quickly, one sentence ideally. Don't run your mouth, which most of us do. Try to be quick and then be quiet. Even if they give you an immediate response, the idea of encouraging them to think before you actually pose the problem is really important to see if that's beneficial. Because a lot of people, if you just present the problem, they're going to give you some kind of immediate, unthought out response, even if it's a really simple situation. You might find that encouraging some time to think helps them think it through a little bit better. We want to allow control and autonomy as much as possible. And that's going to be inconvenient for us at times. To allow somebody who we are in charge of supporting, essentially, either officially or unofficially in charge of supporting, to let them run the show in their own life is going to be inconvenient for us sometimes. And it might even be triggering to our own nervous systems, especially if they're making choices that we consider risky for them. Madeline frequently felt like she had to choose between what was realistic and what she actually wanted to do. So she had people in her life kind of telling her like, what you want is probably not going to happen. Okay, like maybe they were right, but it doesn't help in the moment of collaboration to tell somebody that. Maybe eventually you do have to break that news to them, but Give them the autonomy if you can. Let them experience the difficulty, the success, right? The struggle, whatever it might be of what they want in that moment or outside of that moment. And again, allow for and expect inconsistency, I should say. Inconsistency is not a character flaw, it's a part of FASD. And if it's a stressor for us, that's going to strain relationship. In general, we want to avoid being negative, which is true when you're just trying to consider somebody else's regulation. And it's also something that nobody's going to be perfect at. And some of you are much more enmeshed with this adult that you're supporting, your own child, whoever that person is, than others, right? Not everybody has a really reactive relationship, but a lot of us do because there's been lots of struggles and our trauma kind of interacting with each other and a lot of stress. So really pick and choose when you are going to present something in an emotional way. If something's playing out and you're feeling heated, part of you might think, they need to know how intense this is. They need to know that I'm serious. They need to know how much they hurt me. They need to know how freaked out I am. Whatever those thoughts are telling us, maybe you're right, but it's probably not something that you want to be doing impulsively in the moment. And that's usually exactly what's going on. If we were to stop and think, maybe we would figure out that this conversation needs to happen a little bit later when I'm not as heated. Maybe if this person has never responded to me being intense to them well without getting more escalated, maybe this actually isn't going to be the most magical time. So it might feel cathartic to really let your emotions out when things are happening, but you really got to ask, is this going to do any good right now? Maybe very occasionally, yes. The intensity of a situation, the emotions of their supporter is actually something they'll process in a different way, but you're not going to get a lot of those. So that's why they've got to be pretty few and far between, and preferably intentionally chosen by you rather than pulled out of you by the emotions of the situation. So we want to continue to maintain connection even when it's hard. Not everybody can do that, right? It's not a failure if this can't actually happen. A lot of adults with FASDs will be making choices that will mean that the people in their life who have been there up to that point might need to step back, might need to have some boundaries, and that's totally fine. We just want to consider that in the overall questions and consideration of what their supports are. The adult with an FASD needs to have someone they can ask questions to. So are you a safe person? If you have lots of conflict, lots of reactivity, lots of you expecting them to try harder and then stress and incidents, you're not going to be a safe person. Even if they're out in the world messing up and they realize, man, I really need to talk to mom and dad right now. If there's so much reactivity there, they still may not come to you. And that's usually the opposite of what we want. We want them to come to us when they are ready to receive the support. Madeline mentions that getting in trouble a lot creates danger and a hesitancy to go to adults, right, with questions. And yet it's really important that adults with FASDs have someone they can ask questions to, whether it's about practical life stuff, complex relationships stuff, or I just screwed up. I did something bad. I need some help. What do I do now? Kind of stuff. We want to avoid presenting things as you need to do this and this and this if you want to receive my support. Not that we never have boundaries, but if that's our default and if it's unreasonable, might not be something that we should be asking for. Madeline mentions that this approach feels like somebody saying to her, I'll help you if you accept that my description of your problem is the right one. But communication issues or differences can make getting on the same page about what the problem even is difficult in some situations. I'm going to skip this slide, but there's some additional strategies for that. We also want to consider systems, right? Sometimes the issues are coming from systems rather than the person themselves, right? But there are stressors that are going on. So whatever the system might be, the medical system, the residential system, if that's applicable, school, if that's still going on, they're still going to need an advocate. But even when you're advocating, you really want to be asking yourself, am I listening to my child or to whoever this person is to you? Or are you coming in with your knowledge and what you think this person needs? And even if you're right, are you steamrolling them a little bit? So really make sure that in your advocacy, you are considering what the person wants and working that out with them. When it comes to systems, can we provide proactive supports with the person's approval. So if somebody's starting a new job, in Oregon, we have a whole system for that within the DD system. So I might have a client that I wrote some documents for, they get a job through the same system. I will talk to those people and train them on this person's plan as a way to get some of those supports understood before the person even steps foot into the door, right? The goal being, we know they're going to need these supports. Let's make sure that the people in the systems and the other systems understand that. Otherwise, if they're not going to be able to do it, this might not be worth us risking. Maybe we can meet to talk about the person's support needs, of course, with the person's approval, and checking in as a team. I really like situations where I can check in as a team. We have wraparound services. Maybe you have something similar where you are, but it's a situation that brings a team, usually a complex team, together. Those are mostly for children, though. But a lot of adults have a complex team. Is there a meeting where we're all kind of sitting at the table discussing something, with the person to try to hammer out some of those things? Maybe that's something worth considering. After our advocacy and support attempts, is the situation cognitively reasonable or developmentally reasonable for the person? There are some situations where the systems are expecting something out of the person that the person is not going to be able to manifest. And I might recognize that, and I have to bring up to the team, is this worth it? Right? So, for example, going to college. Maybe somebody really wants to go to college. They've been making it happen, but now we're at the situation of, is the supports available in college really going to provide the supports that this person needs? It doesn't mean that if the answer is no, that they're not going to go to college, but we're prepared for that. Okay, we're going to cross our fingers and we're going to wait until we get some more information and then be willing to problem solve when the person realizes that things are not going the way that they should, or they're falling behind, or whatever the situation is. I talk a little bit about boundaries on the slides, but this is one I'm going to skip now for the sake of time. Maybe I'll come back here if I feel the need to and we have time. So yes, several slides there about boundaries. What I don't want to have happen is somebody hearing that it's okay to have boundaries and then you present an unreasonable expectation, right? Boundaries have to be very careful, especially how we hear the word boundary in our language and people talking about it. There's more nuance to how it's usually being provided. So actually, I'm kind of at the end of my slideshow now, so let's talk about boundaries. People really want to know about this, and I gotta say that I'm reluctant, because especially when we think about the overall approach with neurodevelopmental conditions, a lot of it is about supports and adjusting expectations. And I don't want parents to feel like you do all of that and everything is great, because you do get to a point with certain people where, especially when they're an adult, it's not going to keep working this way, right? And we are people too, right? So we don't want to necessarily live with somebody who's violent toward us anymore. We don't want to be around somebody constantly who's always reactive and oppositional. So there might be times where we do have to kind of bring information to the person to let them know this is what's going to happen if this keeps occurring. So the trickiness of boundaries is that your boundary can still be unreasonable, right? It can be totally legit, but it can still be unreasonable. It can be something that the person is not going to be able to do. So an unreasonable expectation, just as an example, might be, if you swear at me anymore, I'm just not going to talk to you. Or if you swear at me, I'm going to kick you out of the house. That would be obviously extreme. That might just be unreasonable, because you got somebody whose nervous system swears without even thinking. So we don't want to have those kinds of boundaries. We're all human and we all deserve to live our lives. So there is a time where I am working with families or caregivers with an adult with an FASD, and the adult is really struggling, and we have to start putting some of these boundaries in place. Boundaries are not going to stop a behavior, most likely. And so it's less about actually giving them what they need to stop the behavior, and more about saying, here's what's going to happen over the course of events if this continues to occur. And we're often doing this when we're not getting any collaboration. So it's like, okay, I've offered you collaboration. I've offered you all of these supports, that we've talked about, and attempting to collaborate with you. You're not into it. That's okay. So here's what we want you to know about as your team, or as your caregivers, whatever the situation might be there. So we're informing them of what will happen if the behavior continues to happen. is letting them know ahead of time, if this continues to happen, this will occur. If you hit your sister, now that you're 19, if you hit your 8-year-old sister, then you're not going to be able to live here anymore. Maybe that's a beneficial thing to proactively talk about. Maybe, maybe not, right? It can still be a boundary, but we have to consider, what do we want to talk about ahead of time. Our society tells us that boundaries are so important, but what that often leads to is more of ultimatums, and really too soon, right? We skip supports that we might still be able to do, at least for a while, right? That are reasonable. And we present an ultimatum, the person can't meet the expectation, and now we're in a situation that's stressful and potentially a crisis. So what are we doing in the other areas of support? Always asking ourselves that. Boundaries are marketed in our society as a self-care tool, which they absolutely can be. But are we actually using it not to give ourselves what we need for our lives, our well-being, our regulation, and more because we're using it as, they need to know that they can't do this anymore, right? If our hope is hinged on, this ain't going to happen anymore, we're probably not setting up the situation for success. The person will still need adjusted expectations in many areas. We need to examine, why is this issue, the one that you're about to give them maybe an ultimatum on, or just like a firm boundary on, why is this the issue that you need to draw that line on? And you might have a reason that's absolutely, yes, this is the issue. But the idea here is that you are thinking about it and being really planful, and coming up with that. Not all boundaries need to be at some kind of line in the sand. Boundaries can serve different functions. We can use boundaries to lead to plans. We can use boundaries to let them know what our response will be. And we can eventually, in last case scenario, but it does happen and it is necessary at times, use boundaries as ultimatums. What I'm talking about here is only for adults. If you're hearing this and you have a 7-year-old with an FASD and you're thinking about this, no. This is an adult conversation in a sense. So expectations don't have to be a boundary. There's a difference between expectations and boundaries. The boundary comes in when the expectation is broken or is not met in some way. An expectation can be enforced with how we respond. So an expectation not being met. So if my adult child is calling me 40 times a day and my expectation is we get 2 phone calls a day, then I'm not going to answer the phone. That's okay, right? You don't have to answer the phone all the time. Maybe you'll turn off your phone at that point, especially if you are perseverating over the phone continuing to ding at you. If that's what you need, that's totally fine. Maybe you'll take a break from contact. You know what? I need 48 hours before I'm ready to restart this conversation. And ideally, you would be doing this while the person has other people supporting them, of course. If it rises to the level of a boundary being broken versus just somebody not, meeting your expectations, then the response will become a little bit more intense or severe. So, I have some clients who might be very verbally aggressive via text and calling their parents' names. Maybe they need to block the phone number for a while, right? So that you're not receiving that. And so it's not necessarily going to do anything for the person, but it is you following through on what you need for yourself, because you don't want to be called names all day, every day via text. A lot of these have to do with phones, just because that's what I'm dealing with a lot. I have parents of adults with FASDs who have their kid, who the adult with an FASD is living in some kind of residential situation, so not with their parents, and the contact stops for a while, so we can all recover and heal a little bit, especially after big incidents, and that can become part of the plan. Using a boundary as a plan is giving the person a heads up that if a certain thing happens again, then we're going to be having a conversation about this. We're going to need to have a conversation to either problem solve or figure things out. And the next time when this occurs, the conversation isn't going to be optional. So it needs to happen. And if it doesn't happen, then we're going to have to consider what's going on now, because we need some collaboration on this. So this can be good if the person is currently unwilling or not bought into a conversation around the topic. But I will say, if this is what you say, you should definitely follow through. If you're just going to end up adjusting your expectations for them, which maybe is the right thing to do, then why are we having this conversation about the boundary? So just think about that and ask yourself, when this is broken, am I going to adjust because it probably is a brain thing, or am I going to follow through? And you want to follow through if you're at the point of creating a boundary. What this might look like is saying, you're trying to talk to somebody about something. I can see that you don't want to talk about this right now, but if you hit your sister again, we're going to need to come up with a plan, right? So we're not being mean. We're not making it dire. I'm just saying, okay, now's not a good time, but this is important enough for us to need to talk about if it occurs again. If you miss your bus more than twice, we'll need to work together to figure that out, right? So if maybe they're still in school, they're missing their bus, so then you're running them to school every morning anyway, and you're kind of sick of that, right? When there's a resource, and you've problem solved it, right, many times, and nothing is working. You might get to the point where you just don't know what to do, but you need to let them know, if this keeps happening, we're going to have to figure out a different arrangement because I can't keep taking you to school every morning. A boundary as a response is the kind of boundary that informs a person of what we will or will not do when something occurs. One thing that is helpful with this is it will inform you as well as what you're going to do. So you don't have to think about it in the moment and come up with, what am I going to do? This is essentially a plan that's a little bit more proactive. So just some examples of that. Now that you're an adult, if you hit your sister again, we're going to need to call 911. Not really what I want to be saying, but sometimes like we're at the point where we need to like give them the information, right? And see where we're at with that. Maybe we can't problem solve it then, but later on they'll come to us and we'll see that they're open to problem solving something a little bit more than, if you do this, we're going to call 911. And obviously you wouldn't be doing that if like the hit was very low in intensity and not major. We're talking about violent situations with something like that. If you smell when it's time for us to go, we're not going to leave until you take a shower. That's potentially triggering to some people who don't take showers, right? Who don't bathe, who don't smell themselves, whatever the neurodivergence is in that situation. And you've tried to problem solve it in many other ways. Again, that's kind of the idea, is where, I think it's okay in some situations where you don't want to be around somebody who smells that way, and you can let them know, hey, this is what we're going to do. I'll still take you on the outing, right? I'll still go on a visit with you. I'll still chat with you here. But if you're going to get in my car, right, or if we're going to be in close proximity, you need to be smelling okay. And so I'll wait for you to take a shower. So you're not even saying, I'm not going to do this. You're just going to say, this will happen when this occurs. If you run at the pool, they're going to ask you to leave. I like the they in that, because then it's not on you. You're not going to ask them to leave, but if something happens, the system, the facility will. I'll no longer able to take you to work when you miss your bus. Do you want to problem solve that? Right? Something along those lines. And again, all of these would happen after many attempts to problem solve and collaborate. We, of course, have the ultimatum, what we typically think of as a boundary, which we definitely want to avoid, but they might at times be necessary for health, safety, or an ability to provide support. We might get to a point where we say, if you're not going to allow us to support you in this, then this will happen. This kind of boundary is a firm, hard line, with the consequence typically being a little bit more severe. And if possible, even when we're at this point, we want to give them a little bit more than, it's on you, best of luck to you, try harder to never do this thing again that you've been doing for decades, right? Offer some kind of plan. Say, I want to problem solve with you. That's why I'm bringing this up. So let me know when you're ready, right? Gently point out the supports that they've rejected. Hey, this is one of the reasons when you're angry with me, I try to give you time to think. And I know you don't like it, but when that happens, then things get violent. That's why I've been trying to like just give you time to think. So you're just kind of gently pointing out, I have some supports. Can we try those out? Right? And maybe we'll offer to give them resources or support. So they're being very violent. Maybe it's time for us to bring up again, well, you haven't wanted to see a therapist for the last few years. Is this something you want us to look into now? Right? So just giving them some resources and options. Even if you've offered it before and they've rejected it in the past, you still probably want to occasionally bring it up, because they might be in a different place, a different realization about what they need. All right. So those are some of the things that I think about, when I'm in situations where we're thinking about adulthood, or an adult with an FASD, navigating the systems. There's many situations that we didn't cover. Just like kids with FASDs, adults are going to need individualized support, sometimes a lot of support. I want you to know that it's okay to be confused or unsure about what to do, especially if you're in a complex situation with a complex person who has a complex nervous system and maybe a complex history. That's a lot of complexity. So it's okay to not really know what to do. Don't be impulsive then. Give yourself time to think. Read a chapter of a book that's FASD informed. Reach out to a coach or a resource in your community who knows about this, and get some ideas as well whenever you can. And generally speaking, we want to remember the person's strengths and use a strengths based approach. All right. So that's the presentation. We're going to go ahead and for the people who are here live, we're going to take questions. I hope it was helpful. Thank you very much.
Nate, this was absolutely brilliant. You know, every time I pick up your book or I hear you speak, I pick up another nugget. And tonight's topic was very near and dear to many folks. And I know that they were just as actively drinking everything in that you were saying. And I'm grateful that we got the opportunity to talk about boundaries because I know that that's something as caregivers, it's tough, right? It's really tough, especially when we're trying to support, you know, transitioning youth and adults. Um, Myself coming from that perspective, it's just so tricky. Yeah, here's one caregiver. Evelyn's already just saying like, thank you so much. The timeliness is huge. If folks would like to put their videos on, you're more than welcome to. You can put your hand up if you have a specific question that you'd like to ask of Nate, or you can type in the chat. But Nate, I appreciate the topic. I always, when I'm out at conferences, share my perspective, both from a caregiver, but from lived experience as well, that there's really not a lot of information out there on what does adulthood look like and what is aging with FASD look like into, our senior years. Because there's really not a lot of longitudinal studies that I'm aware of. Um, but I think what you've offered tonight, yeah, here's another comment, Nate. Excellent, thank you. I think what's really valuable of what you've offered is it's not just that the supports don't end when you turn 18, but it's how we approach supporting our adults. Yeah, here we go again. Great seminar. Thank you, Nate. Your presentation hit home for me. And I know that family. She's got two adults, young adults. I think you really hit the nail on the head about looking deeper into how we provide supports versus expectations. Here we go again. Barb, more good nuggets.
Hey, Barb.
I
I got
value
your
that.
book, Barb, just so you know. I haven't read it yet, but I got it, so I'm going to review it eventually.
Oh, awesome, Nate. I can tell you, I enjoyed it, much like yours. Very different ways of sharing the information, but you both are very concise and make it really easy to pick it up and read it and go, oh, got it. And now I'm going to go try it.
Yeah,
Or is,
awesome.
oh, it is me that's setting my child off. So tell me, what do you think if we were going to pick a full day workshop, how could you take what you know and what you shared with us tonight and blow it into a full day? Um, I would love to know, kind of what you'd outline high level, because you could take what you've shared with us tonight and put it into every area of our loved ones' adulthood, whether, like you say, whether it's work relationships or loving relationships, partner relationships, supporting their own kids, right? I think
Yeah.
what you've shared with us is really common sense but planned common sense. And then how do we move it up through the age spans? Here's another comment. From my lived experience, I believe that I have of FASD, and many of your things would help. Many of your suggestions would help. So again, here we go. You're hitting a nail on the head tonight. Any other questions, folks? Oh yeah, here we go. Big thanks to Nate. Uh, yes, it's interesting. I think another topic some night, Nate, is going to have to be around grieving, because we're getting a lot more adults joining us who have only been diagnosed in adulthood.
Yeah.
So that may be another great evening to have a talk about. And again, just lots more. Yeah, so here we go. Folks sharing like Barb did about getting diagnosed at age 56. I agree with you, Barb. It's never too late. Um, Hearing Nate talk tonight, I realized why my parents struggled to support me. Unbeknownst to them and I, undiagnosed, I was the person that didn't want the supports. I pushed
Mhm.
it away, and I think they just gave up. And I realize now as a parent, they tried and tried and tried.
Right.
So, any other question, folks? A hand up or another comment, you're more than welcome. But I think Nate, you've really this is a fabulous new presentation. I'd be happy to be your guinea pig anytime. This was great content, incredibly timely, incredibly insightful. Barb's nodding her head, going, absolutely. Yep, yep. Um, what's next for Nate Sheets? Are you working on another book?
Tara has a question. It looks
Oh,
like the autonomy piece. You said when you have more information, we're following the PDA profile as much as possible. We negotiate all the time. Yeah, so that's what we're talking about here is the PDA profile. When
yep,
I say the drive for autonomy, if you know what that means, you know. Um, so the declarative language handbook, if you haven't already, and then I would say that the framework in my book will typically work well. I think that um, I mean, we could do a whole presentation on like what we mean by a drive for autonomy because there's a little bit of information out there, but it's usually associated with autism,
yes,
and it can be misunderstood. Like it feels like we're saying this person really wants to be in control, but it goes so much deeper, and that kind of goes to your first question of, you know, if we were to expand this, what would I talk about? And I have this. We talk about safety, practical things to do to enhance somebody's safety and their connection with their closest supporters,
yep.
and then the other essential supports, that are necessary for day to day life and support.
Yeah, and that's a big piece of our messaging too, is
Mhm.
that connection over correction every single time,
Yeah,
right? Be
absolutely.
be that safe person. I really do appreciate your time and your efforts tonight. I think the fact that folks just drank it all in says everything that needs to be said. I did have a couple of questions there about whether the deck or the presentation, the recording will be shared. We don't share directly with participants. However, in the spring of this year, we are launching a new website for Harrison's Hope, and they will be available for viewing on our resource page. But happy. If folks have questions, I will gladly put you in contact with Nate. I just I love the way you support us, Nate. It's
I'm
just
glad.
that simple.
My goal.
Yep, absolutely. If there's no
Just to
further
clarify, you
questions,
you will be for those maybe who weren't here at the
yes,
very beginning. Mary will be sending the PDF of the slides, so you will have the slides to look at.
yes,
Yeah,
awesome. And I highly suggest that folks, if they don't already have your book, Nate, I've used it as a great guide for other people that are joining our family circle,
mhm,
that want to know a
yeah,
little bit more on how best to support our son and now ultimately me too. And I have just found that your book is one of the easier ones to pick up and read and go, oh, I get it.
Good.
So it is a quick, easy read. And you drive the point home very clearly in it. And I love the fact that that drive for autonomy is a new piece for me, and I can see it. I can see it in my own child, and I can see it in myself.
Mm,
And I can see tremendous value in really digging into that more.
yeah.
So stay tuned. I may be reaching out to you to talk about something for that, maybe in person. Um, I want to thank everybody tonight for joining us. This has just been fabulous. Long overdue. I wanted it a year ago. I just couldn't make it happen. So thank you. Here we go. Incredibly informative webinar. So kudos, my friends. If Yeah, here's another one saying this was awesome. Thank you, Mary and Nate. Oh, Nate, you're the man of the hour. Holy moly. Now it's blowing up. All right, folks, have a lovely evening. Thank you for joining us. Nate, I wish you well. We want another book. Let us know when it's coming.
Sounds good.
All the best. Take care, everyone. It's been a great evening. Thank you.